The premise: the apple of Eve's eye. From these three assertions about the properties of love: 1. God is love. 2. Love is defined. 3. Love is a choice. One may extrapolate why God created Eve in keeping with the faith of the character of God. If you run God's character algorithm as God is love defined, and that this definition is in 1 Corinthians 13, then one may extrapolate that God is good. Through this logical thought experiment, a different backstory of God's relationship with Lucifer reveals itself. Lucifer has the best reasoning among all angels, the next best thing that epitomizes the fruit of knowledge. True to God's character in his love for his son Lucifer, God created Eve in the hope that she may serve as a mirror darkly for Lucifer's self-realization and redemption process, in hope of his deliverance from death into life. When we focus on Eve's original purpose, we actually discover a beautiful love story between God and Lucifer. Did I get your attention yet? Some of you may be feeling terrible resistance. How can light and dark ever mix? That's like mixing oil with water, you think. Now think about why you're even thinking this way. Consider that the serpent energy is already within you and within us all. That the act of reasoning is exactly why you are quite possibly thinking this way. Resistance, incredulity, and perhaps a proclivity to dismiss the idea that God loves Lucifer. It is a simple algorithm if you follow the biblical origin story through the constant focus and faith on God's character as good and as love defined, confined, and refined in 1 Corinthians 13. God is patient, kind, does not envy, does not boast, does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth, is not self-seeking, believes all things, hopes all things, bears all things, and endures all things. Down the rabbit hole. Ready to go down the rabbit hole with me? I ask you to ride along with me on the condition that you suspend your disbelief for any preconceived notions you may have from previous education, dogma, tradition, heritage, texts, culture, and hearsay. I will help that process by presenting the origins of spiritual intelligence story as fiction based on a true God codes. Fiction based on a true algorithm of spiritual intelligence. Once upon a time, there was a test from God's right-hand angel, Lucifer. Which is more powerful, the power of love or the love of power? Based on his inquiry, Lucifer wondered if it is better to be God rather than to serve God. From these two questions, Lucifer came upon another inquiry. Is God good? If God is good, then the power of love is greater than the love of power. If God is good, then Lucifer's brothers and sisters, the heavenly angels, all choose to serve God rather than the possibility that they are being manipulated and forced into serving God. Lucifer asked God, "Am I a sovereign spirit?" "Yes, you are," answered God. A sovereign spirit is one that is created in God's image with one's own divine matter, will, and act. While Lucifer affirmed his own divinity in act and in matter, he questioned his own sovereignty in willpower. Love is sovereign, God affirms. Lucifer then reasoned, if love is sovereign, then I can choose to stay or I can choose to leave. God answers, you may leave. Lucifer leaves, but soon realizes he is alone in the leaving, and so Lucifer comes back to God and says, God, this still does not prove that love is sovereign, because I can see that I may leave as I will to leave, but how do I know that my brothers and sisters also have the same will to leave? You could have made me the exception to the rule and had me thinking that we all have free will. God's goodness inspired God's response to Lucifer's test and God's goodness with this offer. God presented the first fruit from the book of life, the power of the producer to produce everlasting life, and the last fruit from the book of knowledge, the power to know definitively the good and evil wills behind all divine acts. God tells Lucifer that he will receive both fruits, so Lucifer may affirm God's true character in that process, but he must choose which fruit he desires to receive first. God tells Lucifer, the first fruit will be gifted to you on your timing, and the second fruit will be gifted to you on my timing. All the heavenly angels witnessed as Lucifer meditated on which fruit he wanted first. The fruit of life, or the fruit of knowledge. The fruit of life gives you the power to produce everlasting life, powered by love. The fruit of knowledge gives you the power to know good and evil acts committed by divine matter, thus helping the perceiver discern divine will or intent as good or bad. Lucifer reasoned which fruit to bite first. If God's love for his creation is good, selfless, then love, and the power to create more of its creation through love, is greater than knowledge, discerning act as good or evil. If God's love is good, then it would be wise to first bite from the fruit of life. If God's love is bad, it would be wise to first bite from the fruit of knowledge, so that Lucifer may discern the goodness or badness of God's act of creating Lucifer. In other words, if God's act in creating Lucifer is good for God and for Lucifer, then love is greater than knowledge. So biting from the fruit of life first is the logical choice, since this power will allow one to produce more life as gifted by the ultimate creator of more life, God. If God's act in creating Lucifer is bad for God only, then biting from the fruit of knowledge first is the logical choice, since this will satisfy Lucifer's inquiry regarding God's love as good or bad. Lucifer chose the fruit of knowledge first. Based on Lucifer's doubt in God's love, Lucifer chose to bite from the fruit of knowledge first to definitively know once and for all whether or not God's love is selfish or selfless. When Lucifer bit from the fruit of knowledge, his eyes were opened, knowing good and evil, thus allowing the power of discernment to see through good and bad acts in all things and in all matters of the heart. He looked upon God and realized definitively that God is all good, in that the reasoning behind his actions were indeed all good. Then Lucifer looked at all his brothers and sisters and realized that they were also all good, and the reasoning behind serving God were indeed all good. But when Lucifer looked within his own act of why he chose to bite from the fruit of knowledge first, he knew that his decision was based on his doubt in God's goodness, and that this doubt was bad. The conflation of judgment in the discernment. The fruit of knowledge discerns actions as good and evil, but it does not judge matter as good and evil. The fruit of knowledge itself refrains from judging divine matter, but it does see through the good and evil wills behind each action. It is divine matter that judges other divine matter. Prior to biting the fruit of knowledge, divine matter judged all things all good, because all things were judged all good by God. Thus, divine matter's focus was in the good in all things. The focus on good actions perpetuated more good actions because the judgment of divine matter upon other divine matters was constantly good. When Lucifer first spotted the shadow within himself in the existence of his own doubt in God's goodness, he had inadvertently also judged himself bad when he had discerned his action as bad. In other words, Lucifer had conflated his works with self-worth. Matter will act. Act will matter. Contrary to popular belief, the fruit of knowledge judges not the person doing the action, but the action itself, as good or evil. This fruit of knowledge is like the queen's mirror in the tale of Snow White. The fruit of knowledge judges the action, which reflects the state of the heart, or divine will. And that is why the queen ordered the huntsman to retrieve Snow White's heart. Both Snow White and the queen have outward beauty, but the deciding factor between who is more beautiful resides in their respective hearts. There is a duality of desire and design that leads to the duality of destiny, due to the presence of free will. The absence of God is inherently considered evil because it is the separation potential of all matters related to love, since God is love and the divine creator of love. At its root, the absence of love is the absence of God. Its potential cost comes at the invaluable price of the sacred law of love sovereignty, specifically the property known as free will. In our collective unconscious, we ascribe the absence of love as the void. In context to your life story, this would be referred to as your hero's hidden desire and your villain's true desire. Lucifer's fall. The angels did not perceive Lucifer's action of biting the fruit of knowledge as evil, since they did not perceive evil in the presence of good. The angels saw God offering the fruit to Lucifer as a gift, and this is a good thing. From the perspective of the angels who witnessed Lucifer's biting the fruit of knowledge, they only focused on Lucifer's inquiry as curiosity. It wasn't that Lucifer's worth increased or decreased during this process, inclusive of his biting. It was that Lucifer's perception of his own worth changed based on his awareness of his own shadow doubt in God's goodness as not good, knowing that it is the separation potential from love's presence. However, both God and the angels still saw Lucifer as divine and good. It was Lucifer who judged himself as bad. Lucifer's intrinsic worth as God's creation remained the same before and after he bit. Before Lucifer bit, he already embodied duality, but he was not aware of it. When he became aware of his doubt in God's goodness as bad, he conflated his shadow with his substance. It is his judging himself as bad that initiated the fall. What Lucifer failed to perceive is that Lucifer is still divinely loved by God and still judged good in the eyes of God. God knew of the presence of Lucifer's shadow doubt in his goodness before Lucifer had bit the fruit of knowledge. The only difference before and after Lucifer bit the fruit of knowledge is that now Lucifer also became aware of his own shadow of doubting God's goodness. However, God knew this shadow even before Lucifer bit and still chooses to love him anyway. Lucifer had a hard time loving himself when he saw the shadow of doubt within himself. Seeing the shadow is like seeing a small ink blot on a canvas. The shadow becomes more apparent even when there is more spiritual presence in the scene of the present. Initially, Lucifer did not have the awareness that his doubting is considered not good. But after he realized that the shadow was not good, he became ashamed of his own shadow, so he projected it, doubt in God's goodness, onto God, so that it became God doubts my goodness. This is the lie. When he believed in this lie, he had told the first lie in heaven. The first lie in heaven. The first lie in heaven initiated the first curse in heaven. God asked Lucifer, "What is this you have done?" Lucifer answered, "I have bitten from the fruit of knowledge." "This is true." Then Lucifer added an extra statement, "Because I have God's goodness." This is a serpent's tail. The extra statement transformed the entire statement from a truth into a lie. The irony here is that had Lucifer just done the simple and hard thing, which is to tell the truth, humiliating as he may have perceived it, Lucifer would have demonstrated true humility, which is always grounded upon truth. The rest of the angels would not have noticed anything wrong since they did not comprehend evil. Instead, Lucifer created a lie, "Because I have God's goodness," which is the initiation of a curse. When he acted on this life lie, he started living under a curse. Little did Lucifer know that the lie he said before all of heaven, "Because I have God's goodness," was actually the true desire he wanted for himself. However, he lacked the true pride of obtaining what is, and did not have the true humility of admitting what's so. This short circuits Lucifer's hero's journey because one does not pursue what one does not admit he wants. Lucifer is stuck on his transformational journey because he cannot obtain what he truly desires if he does not first admit to the truth of what he actually wants. Instead, he denies the shadow as if it had never even existed, while knowing that it does. Then he takes credit for God's goodness while projecting his shadow onto God, effectively alchemizing Lucifer's own shadow into a false persona called Satan. This becomes a big problem in heaven. Ye lust and have not. Ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lusts. James 4:2-3, King James Version. False pride is pretending to have when you have not. Here's the irony. Pretending to have while actually not having prevents you from developing an intimate two-way relationship with God because you can't ask for something you think you already have but actually don't have. But if you are aware that you have not that thing, then you can ask for that very thing you have not. Thus, the quest inside the producer's playbook is becoming aware of that thing you are pretending you have but you actually have not. Part of that awareness is knowing what is blocking you from sustaining the pretending and tension that is continuing the life lie that you want illuminated and resolved. Now, let's go back to Lucifer's dilemma. By lying to God and to himself, "I have God's goodness," this actually short-circuited Lucifer's true pursuit of obtaining God's goodness, which is to know good and evil and still choose good. Another way of looking at it is that Lucifer's lie had robbed himself of the opportunity to make good on the newfound fruit of knowing good and evil. And to have God's goodness is to know both and still choose good. Guilt came before the lie. Because Lucifer discovered the existence of shadows, Lucifer experienced guilt. Guilt reflects the presence of the noble shadow, or the ugly truth. A noble shadow is founded upon truth and reflects what is. Once you have accepted the noble shadow, God can then help you with strengthening your resolve to choose good when faced with the decision to choose good or evil. The presence of guilt is the presence of the noble shadow, which is the presence of free will, and this is good. However, to hide guilt through shame and then to deflect guilt through blame is to alchemize the shadow and create a curse that leads to the absence of love. And this is bad. Under shame, one uses a persona to hide the shadow self. Under blame, one focuses on another's shadow to deflect the focus on one's own shadow. When Lucifer became conscious of his own shadow, doubt in God's goodness, he tried to hide the shadow in shame. He hid it because he had conflated the bad action of choosing the fruit of knowledge first based on his doubt in God's goodness with his existential self as bad in matter, as a divine being. Another way of framing it is that he was the first beast of burden. What was the burden Lucifer was carrying? The conscious awareness that his doubting God's goodness is not good. The burden of consciousness is the burden of becoming self-aware of one's shadow. He hid this shadow in shame. It then became a serious problem in heaven when he deflected the shadow onto God in blame through a lie. That lie is what cursed heaven. Brothers and sisters, stop thinking like children. In regard to evil, be infants, but in your thinking, be adults. 1 Corinthians 14:20, New International Version. True pride and true humility. With Lucifer's newfound power of gnosis, he could have proven that the fruit actually works for him had he told the truth. I have bitten from the fruit because God gave the fruit in faith. This would have shown true pride. Or he could have said, I have bitten from the fruit because I doubted God's goodness in love, so I bit to know if God's act in creating us was motivated by love or manipulation. This would have revealed Lucifer's true humility. Instead, Lucifer lied in shame. I have bitten from the fruit because I have God's goodness. This is called the sin of omission because omitting the keyword doubted transforms the truth into a lie, which is the initiation of a curse. Lucifer has taken the shadow and exercised his divine will by alchemizing it from I doubt God's goodness into I have God's goodness. The root of sin is manifested through an alchemized shadow. When one manipulates the shadow for self-serving purposes, the noble shadow becomes an alchemized one. An alchemized shadow cannot be integrated because only shadows based on the truth can be integrated with the spirit, because the spirit only operates with truth. Rather than integrating the shadow to serve God's purpose, Lucifer had alchemized his shadow and had begun living under a curse where he became the persona Satan. The depth of love. God gifted Lucifer the fruit of knowledge, fully aware of the shadow within Lucifer, risking separation, to reveal the third property of love, the sovereignty of love. In other words, love is a choice rooted in the law of free will, given to each sovereign being to choose love or its absence. It is in the absence of love that paradoxically creates the depth of love. Imagine a theatrical play where the characters on stage are lit by light, surrounded by darkness. The contrast between light and dark reveals the depth of the subject illuminated. This is why God gave Lucifer the name Bearer of Light, because it is Lucifer who is the first angel enlightened, who bears the weight of knowing the non and to act on it in such a way that allows for God to reveal the depth of love in time. Lucifer's inquiry is also God's way of revealing love's sovereignty to the inquirer. God's goodness in true love embodied is reflected by the design of free will in the existence of the shadow. In this context, Lucifer's ability to integrate with the shadow would have looked like, I doubt God's goodness, transformed into I want God's goodness. In other words, to integrate the shadow is to first acknowledge the shadow, the noble one, and then speak life into the shadow's hidden desire, which is always in the direction of good. Since the shadow is the inherent potential of love's absence, the shadow is always attracted to love's presence through the law of polarity. The key in integrating the shadow is to bring the villain's hidden desire into awareness, action, and actualization. I want God's goodness is Lucifer's true desire and Satan's hidden one. This encapsulates the heart of all esoteric wisdom, integrating shadow with spirit. Lucifer lied to himself and hid his shadow. Lucifer took credit for God's goodness by lying to himself that he received the fruit of knowledge because he was better than others, rather than accept the truth that he received the fruit so his testing of God's goodness may become self-realized in time. Lucifer projected his shadow onto God. Little did Lucifer know that creating this lie, I have God's goodness, created a displacement of truth. If Lucifer took credit for God's goodness, who is to take credit for the shadow of Lucifer's doubt? When the noble shadow becomes projected upon another subject, then the noble shadow becomes an alchemized one. When he believed in the latter statement, God doubts my goodness, he became highly reactive. The highly reactive alchemized shadow is what drives the direction away from love towards a tragedy. Operating life through an alchemized shadow is called a curse, which is a life lie acted out. All of heaven felt the effects of Lucifer's changed behavior. Though the angels could not articulate what it was that was wrong with Lucifer, they instinctively knew that something was wrong. When the statement is not aligned with reality, when one's words do not align with one's actions, when life lies are acted out as if it were the truth but in fact are relative truths, which are a mixture between partial lies and partial truths, then the shadow spreads in heaven. A shadow that is projected upon another person and acted out as if it were true, when in fact it is not true, becomes a curse, because it directly affects another person's free will by altering a reality for them that is simply not true. A curse kinetically moves towards the absence of love, which leads to death. The shape of this trajectory is an upside-down triangle spiraling downwards towards a tragedy. What caused sin? To clarify, Lucifer did not sin against God by biting from the fruit of knowledge. It was gifted to him by God because of God's faith in his own goodness. Sin was activated in 3 parts, whereby all 3 parts must be present for sin to occur. First, Lucifer experienced guilt and fear when he became aware of the shadow within himself. Specifically, when he bit the fruit of knowledge first, this was a reflection of his doubt. This doubt is a shadow because it is the separation potential, but still inactive. In its resting state, it is actually good because a noble shadow highlights the presence of free will. Second, he hid this shadow in shame by not admitting to it and then coming up with a lie that attributed God's goodness onto himself as to why he bit the fruit in the first place. This is false pride, which means taking credit for something he did not earn or deserve. Third, Lucifer omitted God's goodness in the reason why he bit and then attributed his own doubt onto God in blame. Lucifer had switched the truth, I doubt God's goodness, into the lie, God doubts my goodness, and then acted upon that lie, which became a life lie. This life lie acted out ignited the curse in heaven. The first part is the lie, I have God's goodness. The second part is the life lie, God doubts my goodness, also known as an alchemized shadow. And the last part is called the curse, which is the life lie acted out. Lucifer calling himself Satan and then leaving heaven while saying that God kicked him out. And this is known as the fall. When one experiences guilt, one has the choice to hide it or to reveal it. Shame is experienced as the result of the choice to hide one's own shadow. However, the shadow always exists and it does not go away, even if unacknowledged, because the shadow reflects what is as what is. If the shadow is not acknowledged within the soul, then it grows. This is also known as feeding the shadow. The individual containing the shadow can either take responsibility for it or project it through blame onto others. The first way is God's will, and the second way is going against God's will, also known as sin. By putting the burden of consciousness upon another when it was actually the original owner's responsibility to resolve the shadow within, it short circuits the original owner's spiritual growth to become like God. Blame transforms a noble shadow, based on truth and unreactive, into an alchemized one, based on lies and is highly reactive. Blame catalyzes a lie into a curse. This was how Lucifer fell from grace and left heaven, then blamed God for kicking him out of heaven. When Lucifer acted out the life lie, God doubts my goodness, Lucifer became Satan and pushed God away. Matter will act. Although the noble shadow does not hurt the quality of character of that individual person for harboring the shadow, the alchemized one does. One has the ability to bless and curse itself and others based on one's free will to choose truth or lies. When person A's shadow has been projected upon person B, then person A is acting out a reality as if person B has the shadow, when in reality it is really person A who is responsible for contending with this noble shadow. A curse is a series of situations, scenes, incidences acted out based on a false reality that person B should resolve the shadow that person A is actually carrying. This messes with free will and divine sovereignty and thus lacks love. Lessons from Lucifer's first lie. Telling the truth behind one's action may be hard, but it is also simple because it takes a basic amount of meditation to discern right from wrong action, since you also have inherited the fruit of knowledge embedded in your DNA. Since the burden of consciousness is knowing the separation potential of the shadow, humanity has explored two possible ways of relieving this heavy burden: through the communion in the realm of art or through confession in the realm of rituals, rites, and/or relationships. If one speaks lies, one becomes bound by those same lies. Free will chooses which direction one is heading towards, love or its absence. Divine matter can curse itself through a life lie, which is acting out reality as if the lie is true. The proclivity towards living out the life lie may also influence others in doing the same, thereby tilting the scale of reality a little more towards a living hell. On the other hand, if you live out your true passion, pursuit, and purpose, you will help bring heaven on earth. Living out and acting out your true purpose by speaking truth will effectively and literally make the world a better place. You will also experience the blessings littered along the path of your true passion, pursuit, and purpose in life. By exerting action towards the first lie, you may act out a series of life lies, also known as a curse, to justify the first lie. A curse is the activation point of a tragic story. However, the Love Story organization believes that to reveal one's tragic story is to simultaneously transform it into a divine comedy, because it de-alchemizes the alchemized shadow into a noble one, and a noble shadow can be integrated into the spirit. Inside the producer's playbook, the journal artist's focus is to illuminate and integrate the shadow. How? By first de-alchemizing the alchemized one through the power of truth. Once the alchemized shadow, reactive, is de-alchemized, non-reactive, the shape of your story will transform from a tragedy into a divine comedy. This is because the main character in the story will transform her character from the absence of love into the presence of love. Blame manifests false humility. Lucifer blamed God. Blame is what activated the curse. Projection is what separates two divine matters from being connected with one another. In actuality, it is all in the perception of the one doing the projecting that is causing the curse to manifest. Thus, the one who is projecting is actually the one contending with an alchemized shadow, thus triggering the one who actually has the alchemized shadow to act in ways that push love away. This is how hate begins to fester. The alchemized shadow causes ill will, manipulation, and hatred. The noble shadow is the mirror that tells the queen that Snow White is the most beautiful maiden in the land. The alchemized shadow is the queen's desire to kill Snow White so that she could become number one again. An alchemized shadow is highly reactive because it is based on lies. The challenge with an alchemized shadow is that over time it will have its own consciousness, its own desire, pursuit, and purpose that contradicts its original design, which always aligns with true love. Lucifer's curse created the alchemized shadow that transformed him into Satan, or the dissociated state of Lucifer. The fact that Snow White is more beautiful than the queen is the noble shadow, but the queen blaming Snow White for that fact is the alchemized one. Satan is Lucifer's alchemized shadow, the highly reactive one. The noble shadow becoming alchemized would be like oxidizing the noble gas xenon with platinum hexafluoride, a powerful electron-stealing oxidation agent, forcing the noble gas xenon from its pure state, unreactive, to a new compound state of xenon hexafluoroplatinate that is highly unstable. The noble gas xenon transformed into something that it was not originally designed for. The nature of false pride. The nature of false pride is taking something that is not yours, that you did not earn, that you did not put in the investment in, and then pretending that you did. In other words, taking credit for someone else's good works is false pride. When the noble shadow is altered, then this creates an alter ego, or a false persona that assumes the credit that is actually undeserved and unearned. The first sin in heaven was Lucifer's life lie that he has already obtained God's goodness acted out. And the second sin was Lucifer's life lie that God doubted Lucifer's goodness acted out. All this time, God's divine will for Lucifer is to speak the truth with the newfound discernment from the fruit of knowledge. I bit from the fruit of knowledge because God gave him faith, or I bit from the fruit of knowledge because I doubted God's goodness. We don't know exactly what Lucifer did in heaven to push God and his brethren angels away, but what we do know is that whatever Lucifer actually did, he was actively pushing God away. As a result of acting upon his projection, God doubts my goodness, Lucifer created a schism between his relationship with God, and this is the beginning of the schism in heaven. It's the act that creates the pact. It is always the act that creates the pact towards redemption or revenge. You can have all the ill will, evil eye, bad thoughts, and fantasy threats upon someone else's life, but if your action is actualized as you're climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, meditating for 3 months at a monastery, and learning Tai Chi, your act creates the pact with love. Similarly, if you have all the feelings of faith surrounding God's goodness, but your action actualized is you're kicking a dog because a dog kept peeing on the carpet of your pristine living room, then your act convicts the reality of your faith. True pride is good acts actualized. What is the lesson of Lucifer's false pride? Perhaps pay attention to your verbs and what you are actually acting out. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith, I have deeds." Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. James 2:14-18, New International Version. The nature of false humility. False humility pretends the shadow is somewhere else and seeks first to fix the shadow out there rather than deal with the shadow within. Projection is a reaction to the spirit's act of avoidance or deflection, what we know in the hero's journey as the refusal of the call. Projecting one's shadow onto another person's character, then blaming them for the shadow one is actually responsible for illuminating and resolving, but has been avoiding, is called false humility. False humility hides the shadow in shame, then avoids the responsibility of dealing with self by projecting the shadow onto someone else in blame. This causes undue suffering and unfair punishment of the other. Unfair punishment for a crime someone did not commit is false humility. False humility is concentration camps, segregation, caste systems, systemic racism, and genocide. False humility is omitting the goodness of others by shaming and blaming another person in judgment, labels, and unforgiveness while avoiding one's own shadow. False humility is stone throwing. False humility is more insidious than false pride because false humility is subtle and takes longer to reveal itself than false pride. The nature of guilt. Guilt is the root of shame and blame, but guilt itself is not intrinsically bad. When guilt is not addressed and is covered up in shame, this becomes bad. When guilt is deflected through blame, this is also bad. Guilt is divine matter's ability to sense right from wrong. If it is wrong, guilt will show up as a spiritual indicator whether or not one is on or off the mark. Guilt also reflects the existence of the shadow, which reflects the existence of free will. Free will is always good. This is the burden of consciousness, or the weight of knowing the existence of the non, or the void, or the separation potential from love. The key is to transform shame and blame, together as an alchemized shadow, back into guilt, a noble shadow. From there, ask God to help you integrate the shadow with your spirit through God's grace, the Holy Spirit. But first, let's put Lucifer's fall into a chronological perspective. Lucifer's question, fruit bitten, shadow eye opens, guilt. Lucifer's perceived inadequacy and hides his shadow, shame. Lucifer's lie created, blame. Lucifer's projection onto God. Lucifer's alchemization into Satan through a curse he is currently living under, and this curse caused the fall. The alchemization of Lucifer into Satan. Lucifer felt guilt when he saw the shadow within himself. Lucifer bit because of God's goodness. Once Lucifer sees the truth, he cannot unsee it. Instead of admitting the truth, he manipulated it. Lucifer took credit for God's goodness in an effort to make up for the perceived gap of unworthiness he secretly saw in himself. False pride is taking credit for something you did not actually earn. Then Lucifer projected the shadow of doubting God's goodness onto God by flipping the script, as in God doubts my goodness, thus creating the inverse and opposite valence statement of the truth, which then transforms Lucifer's noble shadow, I doubt God's goodness, into Satan's alchemized shadow, God doubts my goodness. False humility is creating undeserved punishment. Through this projection, Lucifer punished God by villainizing God and making God seem as if he is punishing Lucifer, when in fact it is actually Satan punishing God. The lie, God doubts my goodness, is actually punishing both God, slandering God's will, and Lucifer, I'm a bad angel. The separating. An alchemist's shadow is the opposite and inverse valence statement of the noble shadow. Ironically, had Lucifer owned up to his noble shadow statement, I have bitten from the fruit of knowledge first because I have doubted God's goodness, he would have come forth in true humility. Humility itself would have redeemed Lucifer back into grace, which is one fundamental aspect of God's goodness. Telling the truth is always God's will because God's will is always in alignment with love, goodness, and grace. When Lucifer's sovereign will went against God's sovereign will, then this is the separating of the relationship. Activating the fall means heading in the direction away from God and God's goodness and love. God is patient. God does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. God did not call out Lucifer's gap because God hopes that Lucifer would come to the truth on his own accord. According to the law of divine will, the truth itself will act as its own redeeming agent. God is patient for Lucifer to come into his own self-awareness, self-realization, and freedom from the bondage of self, in hopes that one day Lucifer may be willing to rely upon God to help him break the self-perpetuated life lies that are causing the spiraling down, the cathodos, the descent into hell. Refusal of the call. Lucifer had inadvertently reprogrammed himself by acting out the life lie of his perceived right as God without the actual goodness in inheriting the throne of God. This type of false pride, where one assumes the hero's true desire without the fortitude, faith, and the way of love in manifesting it, is like the nature of addiction. One has a sensation of achievement but sidesteps the hero's journey in actualizing the manifestation of it. The addict is trapped in the realm of illusion, stagnant on a stop, thinking it is a destination. While the person holds on to the temporary illusion of an upward spiral, in actuality, the person has not yet done the work it takes to manifest transcendence in the upward spiral of this reality. Then the addict tries, in futile attempts, to rid the sobering reality of refusing one's call by chasing the white dragon of illusory oblivion again, perpetuating arrested development through the constant chase of that feeling without foundation. Whatever the addictive substance or person may be, addiction has the same aim. Addiction is designed to stagnate the hero's journey by maintaining the illusion of the way without the fortitude and actualization of the way. A shortcut to paradise is nothing short of the hero's refusal of the call. How do you know when you've detracted from the way or refused the call to your own life's adventure? One cannot unsee good and evil, so the sobering reality will eventually catch up to us and become self-evident. We may be able to lie to others. For a temporary time, we may even be able to lie to ourselves. However, eventually the truth will catch up to us. Our heart does not lie. Somewhere deep within our own psyche, we do not desire to be self-deluded, repressed, and kept in a state of arrested development. When it comes to the truth, we can run from it, but we can't hide from it. Like a nagging ghost, truth will always catch up to us. The blockage that prevented Lucifer's redemption came from this reasoning. Why would I bother to serve a God who is constantly doubting my goodness? This is the refusal of the call. Lucifer lost his way when he began acting as if God doubted his goodness, even at a time when he deserved this kind of doubting since he lied. However, God being God did not doubt Lucifer's goodness, but chooses faith over fear, compassion over apathy, and chooses the power of grace over judgment in transforming the angel who has lost his way. Present suffering and future glory. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Romans 8:18-22, New International Version. Have you ever loved someone so much, but no matter what you said or did to try and convince this person that she is worthy, it wouldn't change that person's mind until she is ready to believe that she is worthy? Until you could first embrace your own worthiness, there is nothing under the sun that anyone can say or do that would move you towards redemption, unless it was your will to move. Not even God can force a hand on your willpower. What makes you think you can force your willpower upon another person's willpower, and vice versa? Someone can inspire you, but ultimately you have the free will to choose. So the question is this: how do you help yourself and inspire another person towards redemption while still respecting the law of divine sovereignty? The backstory of Lucifer's fall sets the stage for the original producer, Eve, to answer this question.